You are listening to season 2 of the Humans of AI Stories, Not Stats podcast, where Devi Parikh and Dhruv Batra talk to AI researchers to try and understand who they are as people, what their life is like, what they think about, what they're insecure about, and what they get really excited about. Questions that reveal the stories of their day to day life. In this episode, Dhruv talks with Carlos Guestrin, who is a professor in the computer science department at Stanford University. Carlos talks about his structured decision making process, his persistence towards learning, what friendship means to him, and a lot more. For more information about the podcast, you can log on to www.humanstories.ai. And with that, let's get right into the conversation.
All right, Carlos Guestrin, welcome to Humans of AI. Thank you for agreeing to do this. As you know, this is being recorded. I have a sequence of questions for you. Some are lightweight and may not require much thought. Others may require a bit more consideration, in which case, feel free to pause and take your time to think. If you want to skip a question, we can do that. But when in doubt, if you can err on the side of being open, transparent, authentic, we would appreciate. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Dhruv.
All right. So what were you doing right before this call?
Having lunch. It's a work from home world, right? So it's been quite a different 15 months. And I have spent more time with my kids at home, been interrupted more often, make them lunch every day. I had lunch with my wife and daughter, in fact.
Do you have an actual block on your calendar? Is that something you? Okay.
Yeah, so that was it was quite a transition process, right? From the chaotic March of last year, 2020, to figuring out how to organize the time and how to block times. And then I decided there were times of the day that really I had to be there for the family. And so I completely changed how I go about doing certain things.
Yeah. What's your daily routine like?
Well, like everybody, there's quite a bit of change, but there's a few things which are normal for me. We talked about lunch and being there. I also have dinner with my family every day. That's kind of a strong block for me. And sometimes there are work meetings that want to bleed into dinner time, but I'm pretty aggressive at blocking those times. I like to work out in the mornings, and so yeah, so it's basically start that way. My work schedule usually has a lot of meetings during the day, but I try to block those times.
What's the favorite part of your day?
That is a hard question, Drew. And I love all my parts of my day the same, or up or down. I'm not saying whether I love it or not, but I see on the work side, I love the times when I feel like my brain or creative efforts are really engaged. And so when I'm talking about technical work and thinking through something, that I like that a lot. Um, and I also like, the whole life activities that we do as a kind of individual or family. And so I don't have one favorite part of the day. They all kind of have the pluses and minuses.
Mm-hmm. And continuing on hard questions, what's the least favorite part of your day? I should warn you, if you think this is hard, some of the questions ahead are going to surprise you.
And they're gonna go worse. They're gonna go worse. The least favorite part of my day, I would say, uh, there are. I think every job has areas that we love and areas that we're less excited about, and some of it is tax. Um, I think probably the least favorite part of me are some of the kind of organizational, uh, taxing type of management pieces, which will remain unnamed, but you can simulate. And but, some of it uh, is less exciting. That's probably my least exciting part.
Fair enough. Do you set an alarm in the morning?
I don't set an alarm in the morning. Uh, I have 3 alarms. Have 3 kids, and I'm lucky the day that some kid doesn't wake up really early. It's gotten better, but I'm usually up early, around between 6 and 7 these days with one of the kids. And when by miracle one of them sleeps in, somehow my body decides that it's time.
Are you, if you wanted to, are you able to snooze these biological alarms? Like, are you able to get the kid back into bed?
No, no way, no way. I mean, the day is started. What are you thinking? It's time to go. Uh,
All right. Are you a planner, or do you go with the flow, operate with gut feel?
um, I did my, as I think you may know, I did my PhD on planning under uncertainty and reinforcement learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably like a Freudian thing to fulfill a personal gap in my abilities. Maybe AI will make my way of acting the world a little better because I'm not a great planner. I think I don't know if I'm a go with the flow person either. I don't know what I can say I am, but I usually have kind of a high level sense of goals and aspirations or kind of general things. Uh, and I'm not very good at necessarily breaking that down into the pieces of details until I kind of have to. So maybe I use kind of a hierarchical planning approach, top level abstraction, and then the rest is kind of a greedy algorithm to get through the day or the life.
Well put. Well put. Um, do you struggle with procrastination?
This ebbs and flows. I would say um, if there's a task that I'm not into, um, where it feels kind of like a waste of time, unnamed, I will definitely procrastinate. See, just to give like totally uncorrelated example, let's say writing a grant report. Uh, I uh,
From a
I
past
may or may
life.
not have broken the world record of being late at grant reports. Um, and so I apologize to the amazing um, folks who have to suffer through, say, being the program manager for one of the grants I've had. I think the team that I've worked with has done great work, and I don't know why I have this like blocker of making the 2-hour block to write that down as a report and hit submit on the website. So for something like that, pretty big procrastinator, um, probably a world-class procrastinator. But for other things, um, I think I'm pretty disciplined, and so it depends on the topic.
Hmm. Are you competitive, Carlos?
Not particularly. Uh, I think I've lost enough soccer games growing up that I've learned to live with the fact that I'm not going to be at the top of things, and so I am. I think I'm not particularly competitive, although for some things I can get into it, um, but I don't think I. It's a funny thing, but I don't usually, although this is human nature, so not that I don't do it, but I don't usually uh, think about my happiness as being relative to others. Um, like, who has more, whatever the metric is, they would be competitive about. Um, who is got more papers or awards or whatever, money or kids, or I don't know what the metric is in life, but whatever that is, um, I don't think about. I think more kind of in an absolute sense than a relative sense.
Hmm. Is there a rejection or failure that hurt particularly bad?
Oh, absolutely. There have been plenty of rejections or failures in life that that have hurt. I think from a professional standpoint, or even just general life standpoint, I look back and realize the amount of randomness there is in life. Like there's so many spots in my life for a variety of reasons, personal, professional, where uh, um, a small perturbation would have taken me in a completely different path. And I would not be here with you today if it weren't for some of those perturbations. And some of those have been, I usually kind of look back and say, oh, it worked out well. But there were moments where there were huge disappointments. And uh, a funny thing with Stanford, I'm joining the faculty at Stanford, as you know. They rejected me, I think, a couple of times um, when I was fresh off school of my PhD. Um, but it kind of came around. Um, but yeah, there's been plenty of times in my life where there was disappointments, and there's been plenty of times when things have gone uh, surprisingly well. And I think I tend to just kind of look forward in a way.
What is one thing you are worse at than people around you?
God, so many things, so many things. Like naming one of the things that I'm worse at than people around me. Um, so let's see. Where am I worse at than people around me? I on a variety of aspects. So, for example, I talked about soccer earlier. I think in general, when it comes to sports or physical type activities, I have quite a bit of perseverance, but I lack fundamental skills. Some people are able to pick up, like, yeah, now I play tennis. Like they're able to pick up a tennis racket for the first time in their lives, and they're like smashing the ball, and I'm like, struggling to uh, gain the skills. What plays in my favor is that I don't tend to give up on anything, but man, I'm like a slow but steady type person. That goes for everything. Like for example, um, I I think when you were a student, I ran the Pittsburgh Marathon,
Mhm.
and I definitely was pretty low on my pace in term compared to others, but um, I was definitely the one that was like, "Yep, I'm gonna make it no matter what. I can make this, but slowly." So that generally that's one kind of area. Um, I think from a work perspective, I think the sense I have in the field is that a lot of people have more uh, technical depth in specific areas, like they go deeper, and I'm better at kind of the general sense of things and making connections and maybe identifying threads that make sense. But I definitely have to work with others collaboratively who can push things through um, in a greater depth. And I think that you know, I'm answering your question a little bit as like what's your greatest flaw? It's that I'm a perfectionist. I work really hard. I stay after work to get something done until it's perfect, and I never give up. And that's my greatest flaw. But so I have followed. That's, I guess, one of the flaws is maybe identifying things. But I think it is one of those things that comes up where I work best with others because I bring something to the table, but I don't bring the complete thing to the table. And now the way that the AI field has evolved over the last 5 years, it's crazy, and it's moving so quickly, and so many new ideas and new tweaks and tweaks and the tweaks. And when a paper gets presented at NeurReps, they mention like, yeah, and since we submitted, there have been 17 follow-up works to what I'm presenting today, so this is a little bit out of date. And so I'm not good at kind of keeping up with things. Some folks are like on top of let's say the latest literature or everything going on, and I find that difficult. I don't know, that's some examples. I don't know if I answer your question in enough depth, but
which would be consistent with the weakness that you listed.
It would be consistent, actually. Well done. Touche.
On your earlier offhand remark of not being good at naming things, I remember, I think 12 years ago or so, you had mentioned that I think 15 years ago, you had done this paper called Max Margin Markov Networks. And there was a similar, essentially the same idea of
structured.
Yeah. And structured SVMs came around the same time, which are very similar in their ideas.
Yeah.
I wonder if you felt that the naming could have been done better with M3 nets.
My crack marketing team thought about all the options, and we decided on Max Margin Markov Networks. I honestly think that Max Margin Markov Networks is a really good name for that piece of work, but I have been known for naming. My latest startup went through 3 different names, and so maybe that's another flaw to add to the list. By the way, there are many reasons that structured SVMs picked up kind of more of the, although Max Margin Markov networks have been recognized in the field pretty significantly. I think one of the lessons I learned is that Thorsten did a really good job at putting out some open source software, which now has become a de facto thing to do, but at the time was pretty unusual. And our approach was more like, read our paper, go implement it, that's your job. And I think in a sense, I'm glad we've evolved and we've been able to do lots of really open source projects that I'm very proud of. But I think that was a miss there. But the actual work was something that I'm super proud of, and Ben was really the lead on that project. And I learned so much from him during the effort. It was really a wonderful collaboration, and I miss him, and I missed that kind of exciting moment that we had together.
Yeah. How do you make difficult decisions? Are there certain lines of thinking or mental frameworks that you end up approaching it via?
Yeah. When Emily and I were deciding, I was still a professor at Carnegie Mellon, she was at Wharton, and we decided we wanted to be in the same university, and there were lots of options, and we decided what to do. We actually built kind of a probabilistic model. We talked about utilities and preferences and probabilities, and then we tweaked the parameters so it would be like 50-50 on a couple of options, and then we did a coin flip. And when the coin fell heads, which was, or tails, I forget, I think it was heads, for UW, Emily shouted, "Yes!" And so we kind of knew that was her preference, and that's how we decided to move to UW. But decision, I think I approach decision making in a pretty structured way. I don't use SVMs, but I use um, an approach where I tend to try to be clear about what the options are. And I think some folks approach it differently, but for me, it's really about what are the alternatives and what's the value of the alternatives, because sometimes there's two options. Like the hardest thing to make a decision about, the place where many people get most obsessive about, is when there are two options, they're epsilon away from each other. It's hard to figure out which one to pick because you're focusing on the epsilon, but there is uncertainty about that value. And so the epsilon is um, drowned by the uncertainty. And if you try to just optimize the value, it becomes really difficult. And so my approach is more like outlining the options and then just picking one and going with it. And I think it's like you asked me a question for something that I'm particularly passionate about, and I have kind of an approach that works for me, but I tend not to obsess very much. And I don't focus a lot on regret either. In retrospect, I kind of make them decisions and I stick with them.
Makes sense. Do you have an internal monologue? Do you find yourself talking to yourself in your head?
I don't talk to myself. Maybe I'll be a happier person if I had somebody to talk to. Maybe myself, maybe, but then I'll be pretty boring. But I do a lot of simulation. I would say that it goes back to what we were talking about, the decision making. I think I do kind of rollouts and think about what the alternatives are for things. Is that an internal model?
Yeah, I would call that an internal model. I think Kenneth Clark's classical quote of like on the nature of explanations, I would call that an internal model where you can do rollouts, you can get a value for your action sequences and outcomes. Are these internal models and internal simulations, are they visual in nature? Like, do you end up visualizing scenarios or?
It's a funny thing. So I'll digress and I'll come back to it. One thing that I'm not as good at as other people at is concrete math. So and memory. So it took me a long time to answer your first question, but so I'm not great at, like, for example, if you tell me a number to remember or whatever, I'll forget. And I'll forget a lot of stuff. I think memory-wise, I'm pretty selective. But I'm pretty good at abstract math. So X and Y's are great. Once you ground X as 20 and you ground Y as 23, then you go into dangerous territory. And so coming back to and again, even like some people are really good at summing a bunch of numbers and so on. I'm pretty good at that, but the way, circling back to cognitive MLB, the way I do it is I kind of round them and then I add them together. So, if you said like, what's 1,523 plus 2,343 plus whatever, I'd be like, okay, that's about 1,500 plus 2,000 plus, okay, about 8,000 or something. That's kind of like how I approach math. And so when you talk about the mental model, whether it's visual or not, I think I'm a pretty visual person. Sometimes I visualize it, but it also falls into this kind of abstraction piece where one gets labeled as X, gets like blurred into X, and the other one gets blurred into Y, and these are the options, and the rest is just details. And so that's kind of how I roll out. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So I guess I live a life through blurry eyes or something.
Well, you live in latent spaces.
I live in yeah, but it's like latent spaces with a small number of bits. All right, so that's the summary of it.
And what do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something, to the extent that you're aware of it? Is it just more simulations and rollouts of the future?
Oh man. I think a lot of life is relational, right? It's about people and others and processing that. And I think it takes me time to catch up on processing some of those interactions. And so I think a lot of my background brain work is processing what certain things mean. I think I'm not the best at an argument, like an emotional argument, because either I go into the subtractions and X's and Y's, which are not usually great at validating the other person or being concrete about the situation, or it takes me time to process it. And so I think that's maybe a little bit of what goes on.
How do you recharge or take a break and disconnect?
I think I said I'm pretty disciplined about the regular physical activity. I'm obsessed about the Apple Watch, not to advertise it, but in the rings and closing my rings. In fact, I have to look it up, but I'm probably like around 500 consecutive days of closing all my rings, and I have it at a pretty hard level. If that means anything to you.
Yeah, it does not. Can you say more? What does
so
closing a ring mean?
It means it tracks your physical activity, and you have some targets for the days, and when you like meet those targets, it's kind of a ring that goes around.
Got it.
And so so that's important to me. I watch some TV shows. I love to do let's see, things outdoors are really important to me. We this weekend I took my son backpacking for the first time. This was a great moment for us. I love being outdoors. I don't really like being indoors too much. So anything related to that is a big thing, and we had a nice time. And really, I just want to get him into this. And yeah, I also enjoy creation, art, things that I do with my hands. So I try to do things a little bit.
Are you happy with the number of close friends you have?
No. I would say that's an easy question to say no to. There was a New York Times article maybe 10 years ago where it was talking about how much harder it gets to make close friendships with age. And I really felt identified with that. The way that it articulated friendships, it said that something like it comes from frequent random interactions with somebody. So you bump into them, unscheduled, basically, randomly unscheduled. Yeah.
Repeat interactions on schedule. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and when you're in school, it's really easy to do that. And in grad school, I made some close friends that way. But now, especially post kids, everything is so structured and scheduled, and I find it hard. And I'm a person who, for a close friendship, it's really about kind of getting to an emotional level that's pretty deep. So I don't know. I think that I find it hard to have superficial close friendships, and yeah, it's hard. To be honest, it's been one of the challenges that I found in life. Um, the I just think about circling back to this, but Ben Tasker we talked about earlier, who was my best friend really, and we went through grad school and built that bond, but then we stayed so close for so many years, and when he died, it was a huge loss for me because I felt like I really could not recover that piece. And so that's been a um, hard piece in life. After having kids, uh, a lot of friends that you build get aligned through having children similar ages, and we've been lucky to make some close friends that way. Um, so that's been a nice addition to my life, but I still feel like I haven't um, exceeded, or met my goals, my personal goals. Yet I don't know that I do the activities that are necessary to make that happen. So probably on me. Long answer.
No, but deep and thoughtful. So thank you. I personally didn't know Ben that well. I'd just seen him a couple of times at conferences, but just the outpour of connections after he passed away suggested that he clearly had deep relationships with people that he had touched over the years. So
Yeah. Thanks for saying that.
What is something surprising about you that the rest of us, maybe who only know you from a professional context or who only know about your professional accomplishments, may not guess?
That's a hard question to answer, because to me, nothing's surprising about me.
Well, yes, under your model of you.
Exactly, right? So it's hard to evaluate that function. In fact, AI researchers have tried to formalize the notion of surprise, and it's hard because it's really about having a mental model of other people's mental model.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyway, I digress. Something surprising about me, I think. Hmm. I would say, I'm generally, so if I step back, the reason person, again, let's keep this geeky piece going.
Please.
The reason personalization works is that we're not as idiosyncratic as we think we are. That there's a lot of commonality between people, and in some ways, I'm a stereotype. I talked about the outdoors, and I drive a Subaru. When I drive, I hate driving, but and we eat organic food or whatever it is, right? So I am a complete pseudo intellectual liberal stereotype in all sorts of ways, and so the answer to something surprising, it's it's kind of hard. I mean, I have like interests. I have interest in art, for example. They're maybe a little bit more unusual for some folks in my field. But I don't know if that's necessarily surprising, but it's something that I have had a passion for many years. I've had a relatively complicated life, given where I was born and how things evolved over the years. But again, that's kind of everybody has a life story. I think mine is not linear in this way, but again, I don't know if it falls into the surprising category. But one small thing that's a little geeky um, that I'll add is when I was trying to figure out what to study for undergrad, I had a lot of doubts and a lot of interest, and so I had this huge list of possibilities. I was like, um, am I going to become an artist? Oceanography was on the list.
Oceanography.
I watched like Perry Mason on TV, so maybe I should be a lawyer. All sorts of things. But I read a lot of sci-fi, and that goes back to the stereotype. And I said, oh, maybe I want to build robots. So I thought to myself, okay, I want to build robots. What should I study? Mechanical engineering, obviously. And so my undergrad is in mechanical engineering, until I kind of realized that one of the challenges of building a robot is the brain of the robot. And that was kind of much later. But in a small, and this was in Brazil as an undergrad, and a small kind of side story. I'm avoiding obviously the surprising question here, but I was doing this undergraduate thesis, and I saw an ad in my university for a position at Carnegie Mellon to be a programmer. It was somebody who was a grad student at Carnegie Mellon, had studied at the university. They couldn't find a programmer for this NASA sponsored project, so they sent an ad out for a master's student, and I had my undergrad, not a master's, and they were required a master's, but I applied, and it turned out that my undergraduate thesis project was following on the work of the advisor of the student. And it was exactly what they needed for this project. So somehow they decided to hire me instead of like a master's student. So that was a great thing. So I had this offer to become a programmer at Carnegie Mellon research program. And I was like, what is Carnegie Mellon University? I mean, what's Stanford? I didn't know anything. And so my dad, who lives in Canada, was working for a telecom company. And so he sent an email maybe to all. It's like this pretty big company. I don't know if it's like all at Mitel, or so, I don't know. He sent saying, my son got this offer for a position at Carnegie Mellon. Is that a good school? And and then he got a bunch of replies back. This was a 96 or so. People were nicer in the internet at the time. Got a lot of replies like, oh yeah, of course, a good school, what a great opportunity. And so I ended up going to Pittsburgh for a year to see him. And that was one of those things that made a huge difference in my life. But before that, my plan was my university in Brazil and one in Japan, in Tokyo, had an agreement. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go to grad school in Japan. That's what I thought I was going to do with my life at that point. And
wow.
So there you go.
Did you speak Japanese?
Not at all.
Okay, you were just going to pick it up.
I thought, I'm an optimist, so I thought, no problem. But yeah, they offered you scholarships to go to, if you got in. But obviously, I thought, who else will get in if not me, right? But there you go. That's so I don't have anything surprising to say.
No, I think
I can talk for a while.
I think the fact that in alternative sampling of the universe, you maybe have gotten a degree from Japan, and that's pretty. That would not.
Or being an oceanographer, or
Yeah.
a lawyer or something. I don't know. Those are some samplings there.
Yeah, they're
I
pretty
was
high
talking
variance
about,
samples, getting to the definition of surprise.
yeah, the way I say it is, if the computer science thing doesn't work, art was going to be my backup plan. That's kind of how I approached it.
Maybe you can combine both those interests now with NFTs.
Well, yeah, right, that too. But Osman Khan was a professor at Carnegie Mellon in the art department when I was there, and I taught a class around, you might remember this,
Yeah,
around
this was.
2007 or something.
Yep, I remember
That we
this.
called Art That Learns, where we built art installations using machine learning. That was my attempt to combine the two.
I remember that. Conversely, I guess flipping the question around, what is one thing about the world that surprises you?
Well, the older you get, the more you see, the more samples there are, like more dense your density function is, the less surprising the world can be for you. In a way, some things don't shock me as much as they used to. It's really interesting to see yourself and then see your kids as you're going through life, and kind of looking back at how these things make sense, how much exposure and the density function and naiveness and optimism and utility function, I think, change over time. But I'm digressing from your question. I am personally, as an academic and scientist, I'm honestly shocked by how much disregard there has been for science, and for the scientific method in some of the decision making that we see. And I'm not shocked in the sense that I don't believe it, because I can explain it with a model that's, a mental model of the world, and some heuristics associated with that about how, what people are trying to maximize. But sometimes it's hard for me to understand how some of these things can be possible. So that's an example that meets my stereotype, but it still bugs me tremendously. And the pandemic has been a great example of that, where we've seen again and again bad irrational things happening. And then, not to get too much into the political landscape, but also not like, with the last US president and the normalization of racism that was present. I think that really shocked me and saddened me. The really misogyny to the treatment of women and minorities and immigrants, dehumanization. That was something that over the last several years really saddened me and shocked me to the core. So anyway, not to get too deep, but that's something that was on my mind quite a bit. Like when four congresswomen who were American citizens were told to go back to where they came from, that really hit me to the core. I lived in several places around the world, and we didn't talk too much about my life story, but I've experienced discrimination everywhere that I lived, and I've been told to go back to where I came from. And I've always struggled with that, because I can't really tell you where I come from. I ask, when somebody asks me, I say I'm from Brazil, but that's just because I don't get into it. It's just like a long conversation. And so when when that was said, not only did I feel deeply saddened that somebody would treat people this way, but it also hit me to the core, and there was a certain degree of projection of my feelings to it. So that saddens me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I can relate to the aspect of your response where that question of where are you from. I mean, I'm sure I suspect I haven't moved around as much as you have, but there are lots of people who don't have a clear answer to that question. They have a long life story, and there's no simple answer to that question. And these statements can be quite hurtful in that sense.
Yeah, when I say I'm from Brazil, I take the easy way out. It's kind of like romantic to be from Brazil, and Brazil has a great soccer team, and so we're doing terribly in the pandemic, but has had a pretty positive reputation. So it's become almost a defense mechanism to be able to live with the question that is a complicated question for me.
How do you imagine your retirement?
I don't. As we talked earlier, the looking forward and having plans and abstractions. I don't do well. I think I have couch potato genes, in a sense that there is a natural state of like dissociation and couch potato-ness that I fight against. And so if you look at how I live my life, there is basically zero couch potato-ness almost, and yet I'm always in fear that I'll end up there. So I think retirement is not something that I can visualize. I don't know if I'll be doing the same job. I can reinvent myself again, but I hope to be active in fulfilling ways that are kind of contributing to the world as long as I can.
There's a Nobel Prize waiting to be won for the identification of the couch potato gene.
Oh well, I'm happy to donate some chick swabs to help that process. I can tell you 100% that that's there. But it's totally genotype, not phenotype, and so. But that's about that personal struggle.
Yeah. Perhaps on a shorter time horizon, let's make a falsifiable prediction. When do you think the world, or our corner of the world, will open back up to normalcy post-COVID?
Well, we Emily and I have kept up with this stuff in quite a lot of detail. She's done some research on the topic, has been a little bit involved in. So I don't know if I have I have a more informed decision, a more informed perspective than some. But of course, this is a combination of science and reality as we're seeing, right? So to start digressing even more, I got my second dose of the Moderna vaccine maybe 3 weeks ago, and I've been struggling with the mental model of transitioning from where we've been, which we've been extremely careful, to something a little different. And so the recent announcement of no need for masks when you're fully vaccinated, and I'm struggling with that even being a reality. So there is a lot to this question. It's like multifaceted because there's political and there's scientific and there's emotional pieces coming together, the intersectionality of that. In terms of normalcy, some of this has to do also with when our kids going to have access to vaccinations and when those are going to be widespread. And part of it is going to depend on whether there's variants and whether COVID becomes more like the flu or it becomes more like smallpox. My sense right now is, since this is falsifiable when you're asking me to pin something down, my sense of this is that vaccinations for kids, maybe after 5 or something like that, maybe a little younger, will start in the fall, early fall. And so if you work backwards from that and you think about even younger kids, we're probably talking winter of 2022 for people to start, in the US at least, to be more broadly vaccinated. And then since there are such huge chunks of the world with lack of vaccinations or big spreads, we talked about Brazil, India is in a terrible, terrible place, which saddens me. We should fully expect some variants to evolve from that, kind of take a rational step to this. And so we've been talking about boosters and process. So I think COVID is going to be on our minds. And I don't mean like the flu where it's maybe on your minds that you try to remember how it's flu shot, but I mean like actively on our minds, at least through 2022. And then after that, that's where we get to the fundamental question of what will go forward. So I don't know. That's my prediction on this. It's kind of saddens me. But on the other hand, you can go indoors without a mask now if you have a vaccine. So maybe now is the time where everything's normal.
Yeah, I guess I didn't precisely define normal, and I purposely left it for
yeah. So I got to monologue professorially for all this time. On a more personal note, about 2 weeks ago, I think, I broke the strings in my tennis racket, and I went to a store, which I haven't been doing at all, to get it restrung, and it's in this mall near here, and there was all these people in a cafe outside having drinks and hanging out, and it was like 10 a.m. and I felt such a strong sense of nostalgia. I love going to coffee shops and like working or spending time and being around that bustling kind of piece, and that was such a big part of my life. And when I saw that, it felt still far away for me, but it felt like something that I really miss. Yeah, I hope we can get to a better place sooner than I'm suggesting.
Yeah. On to perhaps a significantly longer time horizon. Do you think there is a point to life and our existence?
When you said there were harder questions, do I think it's pointless? So I was I'm going to digress and then we'll come back to a question, but it's a little story. I was at a dinner some years ago at the house of a very famous tech person, unnamed, and he had brought together, I think, 8 people, talk about the future of AI. This dinner, this really nice house in San Francisco, and we, people were shooting whatever ideas for the dinner, and when we ended, like dessert came and we're gonna pack up. Said, I have one more question for you. Oh, how do you know that we're not in a simulation? And
okay, that suddenly narrowed the distribution of the people who may have hosted this dinner.
Yeah, and this was maybe 5 years ago. And so, this notion even of being a simulation has become more clear now than it was, then. Uh, and I hadn't read Superintelligence. I don't even know if that was out or not. But uh, all I'm saying is, it's an interesting question what the point is. Now, when you say what's the point of life, like if this were a simulation, maybe I'll ask you a question. So let's say that we're living in a simulation. Would you say that there's no point to life if you live in a simulation?
Well, it would suggest that there is a point, perhaps in the mind of whoever created the simulation.
Right. Yeah. So I'm generally an optimist, and I don't think too much about certain things. But I think there is uh, a point to life. I think, uh, first of all, I think it's important for each of us to live the best life that we can for us, whatever that means. I think that that's important. And it's hard. Life is hard work. I also think it's important to figure out what you want to give back to the world, like what is important for you to contribute. And it's kind of non-judgmental thing. Maybe it's about, the kids that you have and how you raise them. Maybe it's about the, the ad platform that you create, whatever it is. It's like, I think, it doesn't have to be about helping starving children in Africa. It can be whatever it is, but I think it's important to have a passion and to drive to make a positive contribution to the universe. And I've always felt that way. And one of the things that I feel really good about looking back is this, for example, having worked with a number of people, students who have gone on to do great things like you. And so it feels good to have helped people a little bit, even if it's in a different way. And so that's I think what the point for me, for my life. I don't know what the point of life is. What's the point for my life? So there. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. And I remember anytime I've actually genuinely ever tried to thank you for everything you've done, the only thing you've told me back is, paid forward. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I think you're doing interesting things, and I think that's the investment, that the small investment I made, teaching a course that you took, or
it was a bit more than that, but
yeah, being on the thesis committee or something. Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the one thing that I do like about the professor job is that you work with people and you help them along the way, and they go on, and they surprise you. That's something. Go back to surprising feast. There's surprise there.
On to perhaps an even more philosophical question.
Let's go.
Pineapple topping on pizza, yes or no?
Oh. After you have kids, a lot of your culinary choices are driven by kids, and my kids like pineapple in their pizza. So the answer in my household is yes. That's an easy one to answer.
But what's the answer in your heart, Carlos?
It's a solid yes. Pineapple brings a touch of sourness and sweetness to an already well-studied culinary invention, and so I think it all comes together. I'm for strong for.
Okay. And our final question: why did you agree to do this interview with me?
Well, you asked really nicely, you know. And then I didn't reply to your email for months. I felt guilty. And so I ended up doing it. I mean, that's kind of the summary of it. Next question. Oh, no.
Yeah, and that's generally how I tend to approach things. Ask nicely and then persist.
Yeah, no. I mean, it is narcissistic to imagine that me doing this has a positive impact on the world, going back to the point of life, or is meaningful to anybody. So I don't think for this particular one, I appreciate the work you do, but I'm just saying, like, I don't view it as that, you know, yet qualifies as something where I think has had the impact I was hoping for. But I hope it does. I hope it's meaningful to people. Fun conversation for me, and I like chatting with you. So all in all, it's a win-win, and
Yeah.
I don't have to, you know, approve any expense reports in the process. So it's a great hour.
Yeah. That's kind of been my motivation as well. It's twofold. One, to reconnect with people who, just a structured conversation, getting a glimpse into their life. And the other is just giving others a glimpse into the lives of these people who, at least I think, have interesting perspectives and have led, thoughtful lives. And what it does is it lets people see that we're all struggling with our daily struggles. We're all sort of trying to find meaning in a meaningless universe. And
It's
when
not meaningless. There's a point. We got to the truth of that.
we
But
got to our truth, our individual truths.
no, well, as I tell students who are struggling with deciding things, especially what job to take, the choices I've made in my life are the right choices for everyone, and thus you must do exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I probably have told you that at some point, that same line. Um,
And my motivation was to expose that to others so that they could also benefit from
from that incredible insight, right?
yeah.
Well, I do appreciate the time. It's kind of fun talking to you about this, and I'm glad you're doing this, and I hope it does have a positive adds value to people's lives, which is great.
Exactly. So in that regard, thank you for doing this, and thank you for sharing. I had fun, and I hope you did as well, and I hope
Yeah,
people find value in
absolutely.
it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this, and I hope I get to see you in person soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Talk to you soon.